I would like Doc's thoughts on why press coverage never starts with our secondary jamming the receivers at the line. Is it coaching, lack of desire, etc., etc.?
They're
You've
doing
had
what
an
they're coached to
opportunity.
do.
So press and free release.
Yep. They're doing what they're coached to do. Now, I will say it's generally not a free release that we're seeing. Now, there are cases where it's turning into a free release because they get beat to their leverage. Essentially, what's normally going on with the press when they're actually still in press and they don't get their hands on a guy is they're keeping leverage to one side or another. So you press on the line of scrimmage and you're to the inside. Let's say if you're playing man, most man coverages demand inside leverage, which means you don't want that receiver to cross your face. You'll give him a release to the outside and then you'll run with him. That's, your typical coverage. Um, so what's happening, as far as I can see it, is most of the time, if teams are not really challenging the leverage, so you got inside leverage in that case, or sometimes if you have robber, you're playing outside leverage, it can change it. Whatever the leverage is, basically, if the receiver it wants to release to where the defensive back doesn't have leverage, he's just mirroring and turning and running with the guy. Now that is a technique. I mean, that's a commonly used technique in pass coverage, and you see more of it at the NFL level. Uh, because at the NFL level, you're not allowed to put your hands on a guy all the way down the field. Now in college, there's no 5-yard zone. So to me, the benefit of getting your hands on a guy early and keeping him on the guy is pretty high, especially since the pass interference rules in college are not nearly as draconian as in the NFL where it's spot. But uh, what it looks like to me is for the most part, they're letting them take the release as long as they're not taking it to their leverage side. Now, it's really bad when you see them cross over and beat a guy to his leverage side. And that's happened a few times. And that's led to some big plays where the corner let him cross his face, as a decent release move by the receiver. Corner lets him cross his face and doesn't get a hand on him. That's really, really bad for a defense when that happens. Uh, but what's probably happening here, and this is just speculation from me, thinking about the why you would coach it this way, is there are a few things. One is you never want your defensive backs to lunge, and when you're trying to get your hands on guys, a lot of guys can get kind of over eager to get their hands on a guy, and then you lunge, and then it's really worst case scenario because then the guy is able to kind of pull you out of position and get upfield. I think what they're doing is they're basically playing a mirror technique and trying to just run. They're relying on their speed, and they're basically coached. Okay, force them to take the release that you want, and then just stay on their hip. That can be fine, but you'd really better have great footwork coming out of that mirror, and you'd better stay on their hip coming up the field. And they've not done a great job with that. So my preference in general, as a former receiver, this also is part of the reason for that. My preference in general, and the thing that's more frustrating for receivers to play against, is a guy who does a great job mirroring and then uses his length to kind of get his hand on you and kind of irritate you a little bit as you're taking the release that he's allowing you to have. And I think they need to do a better job of closing space once a guy takes that release and does his thing. But I think they're just kind of playing conservative here at the line of scrimmage, which is if he wants to take that release, you let him take it. What you can't do is let him start taking that release and then go to get your hands on him, lunge, squirt, and then he squirts to the inside, and we're really screwed. So I think that's a lot of what that's about. They're also playing a lot of bail, which is where you line up on the line of scrimmage, and then at the snap of the ball or right before the snap of the ball, you bail out and you're actually playing off coverage. You're just disguising it by lining up on the line of scrimmage initially. And they're playing a lot of bail coverage, which then the goal of that is to play over the top and not let the receiver release, not let him pass you, because you're usually playing a deep zone when you're in bail. So they're playing a lot of that too. And again, I'm not a big fan of bail. I think, if you're going to play off, a lot of times it's best to just line up off, especially if a guy has enough speed that if you're in bail, he might be able to get on top of you and get over the top a little easier. But that's just kind of what they're doing. I'm not a big fan of it. but it is what Chizik has done a lot of the places that he's been, and it seems to be just basic philosophy. It's different from the philosophy the last few years. I mean, Jay Bateman was big on receivers should get their hands on the guy as much as they can and press where you can. Now there were some, discussions about that sort of thing, but Bateman wanted press pretty much all the time just because of what it communicated to the safeties. If you press a guy, he has to declare where he's going, and it can slow him down a little bit and can make the safety's job a little bit easier. But there are different philosophical approaches to this and different fundamental techniques for it, and Carolina's taking one particular angle on that.
Yeah, Tommy, to add a little bit to that, and I spent some time watching Charlton Warren and Andre Blah coach the corners during camp. And one thing, and this kind of builds on what Jason said, one thing that they really stress to their guys is that when the wide receiver comes off the line and kind of extends his arm there at the line of scrimmage, what they're taught to do is basically kind of a swim move with their strong arm. And then as soon as they knock the receiver's arm down, they don't use their hand, but they use their forearm to maintain contact so that the wide receiver doesn't have that free release. So it's basically they're pushed, they snap down, and then they stick that arm out with their forearm so they can kind of control the wide receiver and make sure, as Jason says, he doesn't get that free release.
And that's actually the funny thing is Mike Ingersoll, you'll probably remember this, Greg. Mike and I, back with the late J.B. Sissel, went out and shot videos about press technique where we demonstrated all this stuff on the field. That's back in the Inside Carolina archives somewhere from 2014 or 2015, where we actually go through that specific technique, which is really good default technique. My complaint is that I haven't really seen it manifest on the field because I'm not seeing guys get their hands on the receiver. So first of all, they're not getting close enough to where the receiver's actually trying to get him off of him because they're just mirroring, and the receiver's just taking the direction outside of leverage and just going, and you're not getting the reaching for the receiver's arm, which you want to kind of pull back, swim over, pull back, and then you get that forearm on him, and then you're trying to wall him is really what you're trying to do. And the beauty of using the forearm is that you don't get called for holding. Right. So you're able to control. It's basically, it's like what happened in the NBA after they outlawed hand checking. Everybody went to the forearm, right? And you're basically doing exactly that. You're trying to control the guy, off the dribble, or in this case, running the route with that forearm. And move him in the direction that you want. And really, you're trying to squeeze him to either the sideline or to where your coverage is. But I haven't seen a lot of that. And that has been one of the things that about this defense so far this year has driven me crazy, is you've got two really long corners, guys that have long arms that have shown the ability to press in the past. At least they showed the ability as freshmen. Each one showed the ability as a freshman, who don't seem to be doing a whole lot of it well at this point, and that's really frustrating to watch.